Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Kapchis, President and CEO of Chestnut Park Real Estate. We're happy to be doing our podcast again. It's been a week or two since our last one. We've got a very interesting podcast today, but I'd like first for Doug to introduce himself and to introduce the wines that we're going to be decanting
Very good.
today.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Doug.
No, I interrupted you. That was rude.
No, that's a short introduction, then we'll get into a deeper one.
A couple of kind of things first. You have your watch in the right place, I
I do,
noticed.
there'll be no banging.
Okay. And you do recall that, was it podcast number 1 where you thought that you looked, I forget, washed out, or
That
what
was
was
correct.
it? Was it washed out?
I was.
Yeah.
I was.
And we fixed
It
all
was
that.
the lighting,
It was the lighting. And then we fixed it because we started in a different room.
correct?
Yeah. And I asked you at that point, so are you
You haven't
happier
even
now?
introduced yourself.
Hold
and
on a
we're
second. I know.
listening to you.
Just finish this. You said I can't tell because I don't know. Now that you've seen podcast number 3, were you happy with the way
I'm
you
not
looked?
totally happy, and as you know, before this podcast started, I was gonna sit on that side.
Yeah, but that's not
But
going
I
to
didn't
happen.
want to hurt your feelings.
It's
and
not
then
about
I
hurting my
shifted
feelings. I'm just more
back
comfortable
here.
on this
Look,
side.
just introduce yourself.
I'm Doug Gubitz. I've been with Chestnut Park for 30 years, and I've been the Vice President of Business Development for just under 2.5 years.
Perfect.
All right, there you go.
Perfect.
So now just answer the question. Did you feel you looked better at the last podcast?
Better.
Okay.
Better. Thank you.
Because I looked washed out at the last podcast, and I looked considerably better. And you guys know this in podcast numbers 1 and 2.
You did. That's why I was upset.
And that's why you tried to switch
That's why I was
seats on
upset.
me. And that wasn't
Tell
going to
us
happen.
about the wines that we have to choose from.
So let's talk first about last time's wine when Chris had
You
the
haven't lived that
opportunity.
down, have
No,
you?
I'm still reeling from that. Chris had an opportunity, if I might remind everybody who's watching, to select this wine, which is a Groix de la
Don't
Rose,
forget this podcast is called
Decanting Real Estate.
Decanting Real Estate. We haven't gotten into much real estate yet so far.
But we're in the decanting part of
Okay.
Decanting Real Estate.
All right.
So he had an opportunity to select this wine, which he did not because he chose the 08 La Croix Saint-Georges
Correct.
Pomerol, which he felt was past its best before date.
Correct.
And in French,
I think
they
I
call that
phrased
sur
it-
les genoux, on its knees. Which it was, but it became, after about an hour, it
It did improve.
kind
It
of
started to open.
yes. Se réfléchir, non.
Retrouver sa jeunesse.
Il a retrouvé sa jeunesse.
Ah.
That's it. Okay,
It
today
found its youth.
it found its youth.
It found its
Fountain, la fontaine de jeunesse.
youth.
So today I've given Chris an opportunity to reconsider the wine that he had previously rejected, Groix de la Rose, 2015, Saint-Julien. And of course, he always gets an opportunity to select from another one. This is a house fave, Malisco Saint-Exupéry from Margaux,
Amazing wine.
216. I've served this to you before.
You have.
But this is a bit of a softer vintage, 2015. This is probably slightly more tannic. And go ahead.
This podcast is being filmed in the middle of the afternoon.
At 7:30 p.m.
It is not.
Oh, some-
And I think we should go soft rather
Soft.
than tannin.
fine.
Okay.
Mhm.
So why don't you start opening that?
Yes.
I'm going to do a little introduction as to what our podcast is going to be about today.
Okay, good.
And while Doug is opening that, I just wanted to mention that we wanted to, and it's going to turn into a debate because we take differing positions on this. This is a new policy, perhaps not that new today. It's been around for over a year, which requires properties that realtors list to go to the MLS unless they stay exclusive within the brokerage. Many reasons why that policy was developed, and it's those reasons, depending on what side of the fence you're on, that some agree and some disagree about the policy. Doug has his views. I have my views. I'm very much in favor of the policy. and Doug will indicate why he doesn't believe some of those views are.
I've tempered my views.
You've tempered your view. But just before we start on that, and Doug finishes opening,
This could take a while.
an article came to my attention literally just before we came to the podcast. And I'll just hold it up. It comes from Inman, which is a kind of, I guess, a real estate organization in the United States. And it says how Trump's vow to deport millions of immigrants will impact housing. The only reason I mention it is because when I was reading it, it made clear to me how complex our housing industry, our housing problems are, and the thought of being able to somehow achieve affordability in an instantaneous way is practically impossible. I'm just going to.
We kind of talked about that at a previous
We
podcast.
did in a previous
It's a
podcast.
multifaceted problem with multifaceted solution. There's no flipping a switch and fixing it.
Correct.
But this is
But
fascinating.
sometimes decisions can make the situation even worse, and essentially that's what this article is all about. First of all, they make it clear that the fact that undocumented immigrants that are going to be deported are not going to impact the housing market and certainly its affordability, because as they point out in the article, the bulk of them don't qualify for mortgages, and because of their status couldn't qualify for mortgages. So most of them live in rental accommodation and oftentimes in multifamily rental accommodation. But what really struck me as being disconcerting, and I'm just going to read this to you. It says here that it's important to push back against the argument that that these policies that President Trump is going to come up with are going to be a cure-all for the housing problems in the United States. And the reason for the pushback is, and I'm going to read this to you. It says, in addition to not alleviating the housing shortage, economists fear deporting millions of undocumented people will ultimately exacerbate inventory and affordable issues. So, what's the term you use? Unintended
Unintended consequences.
And listen to this. These undocumented immigrants account for 23% of the construction workers. They account for 29% of all the painters. They account for 32% of all the roofers.
These are incredible numbers.
Yeah, I'm reading from, and this is a Harvard study that this is coming from. 38% of drywall and ceiling installers, 25% of all masons, and 24% of all the carpet and floor installers.
So you deport all these people, and we can't build any houses.
That's essentially what the article is all about.
That is definitely an
Kind of
unintended
frightening
consequence. Crazy.
set of statistics.
Want to smell that?
I prefer it in the glass.
You did it last time in the pit.
I prefer it in the glass.
This guy doesn't like to be inconvenienced.
Well, it'll open more when it's in the glass. Look,
Okay.
it's got to work its way through that narrow neck.
Work its way through. I'm sorry. I don't know.
Would you like to give some tasting notes to our audience about this?
I could have brought actually tasting notes, but I don't do that anymore. I just trust your. If you're off on
beautiful
this,
nose.
if you're off on this one,
This
then
has got
this
a
might be
beautiful
canceled
nose.
podcast.
Thank you.
Our producer.
Okay, come on.
No, I
And that seriously,
love the color.
it's
Great
very dark
legs.
again, just like that. Even though it was an 08 last time, this is okay.
There's nothing jammy about this color.
Nothing jammy, but a little jammy on the
A
nose.
little bit, but not.
Not crazy.
But you do get the classic chocolate, cassis.
Oh, look at him, man. What do you think, Christian?
I think it's delicious.
You know what I would really like to smell is wet dog. And I don't get any wet dog.
You do. You have a dog that's often wet.
I know, but
Oh, in the wine.
he's not in here.
Yeah, no, wet dog's not like wet cardboard. Oh, those are
Wet carpet, wet newspaper.
That's a defect.
Yeah.
Wet defect is considered an attribute of cork taint, so you don't want that. This is quite light on its feet. This is your kind of wine, actually. I hope I'm not. Yes or no? Totally your kind of wine.
Not as powerful in the finish as I would have thought.
No, it's a lighter style
Yeah,
vintage.
not as powerful in the
But
finish.
it's 3:30 in the afternoon.
It's true.
That was the agenda. That'll be more powerful in the finish. Maybe next time we'll open with 2 and then we can do an AB. That's how we normally do it.
Yes, that's true. That's true. Let's get to our subject though,
Okay.
if we may. And our subject today, as I said a moment ago, is called in Canada the Korea Cooperation Policy.
Yeah.
It is as controversial and perhaps even more controversial in the United States than it is here in Canada and certainly in southern Ontario. In the United States, it's called the Clear Cooperation Policy. And a little history. I believe one of the reasons why this policy was put in place is prior to, I guess it was the beginning of January 2024 that it came into effect. Prior to that time, in my opinion, there was a lot of abuse in the industry because of the fact that agents could take listings exclusively, put a coming soon sign on the front yard, restrict access to that property, and then ultimately sell it themselves. And again, in my opinion, the consumer, in this case the seller, was being, I shouldn't use the term punished, but was not achieving maximum exposure, which ultimately would lead to the best price that the market would bear.
Can I interrupt? I think you're talking about the seller having been punished, although they would never really know because, as you've said many times, they received an offer, they made the decision, they accepted it based on the information they had.
I think they were misled, though, Doug.
Well, we really can't comment on whether they were or not, but the bigger issue was the complaints coming from the buying side of this equation. Because if you had a coming soon sign, there was no
Absolutely.
exposure to that listing, and the consumer was complaining against the regulator that, it said coming soon to MLS on such and such a day, but it never came to MLS. It
Correct.
was sold before that. And I think that's how this thing started. And as you know, this CCP, Clear Cooperation Policy, was a National Association of Realtors policy and implementation many years before. It was 2020.
2019 to 2020.
Right. But we should maybe just give a little bit more context to this. These are not government regulations. Association and national associations. So this is the Canadian Real Estate Association,
Correct.
which is the National Association for all realtors.
Which is the same in the United States, the
As the
National Association of
Exactly.
Realtors.
So this isn't law like the province of Ontario has implemented a law about using the MLS. It's our association directives.
Correct.
Okay, so came into place predominantly because buyers were complaining. Saw the sign, said coming soon, never came to market.
Never came to market.
Sold beforehand. And when then all the other agents and buyers were scrambling to get into these coming soon listings, which, as you said, and you're right, they were very restrictive.
But they were all held hostage. If the listing agent was cooperating, they might get in. But if the listing agent wasn't, they never got in. And it created, in my opinion, terrible dissension and ultimately credibility of our industry.
I can't argue with that.
That's the reason why they
So
put
we're
it in
at
place.
Edom on this point.
Probably one of the only times
That's
we're at
it. For
Edom.
the rest of the day, we don't agree on anything.
We're at Edom on the wine today, too.
Not entirely, because you think it doesn't have much of a finish.
Well, I think.
But, you should also give it time.
Okay, we'll see. We've got a few more minutes to go.
But more kind of Burgundian-like.
Yeah,
Not
I would
every
agree.
wine- not every
That's a
wine
very
has
good
to-
point. That's a very good point. I
Not
would
every
agree.
wine has
Yeah.
to have a huge, massive finish to
Agreed.
be enjoyable.
Agreed. It has a definitely a Burgundian feel to it.
Okay, which I think
May I
is
just taste it once again?
as often as you'd like, up to a limit, which I'll dictate. You're going to say chewy. It's not chewy.
No, I was going to say it kind of envelops the entire cavity of your mouth.
Does it?
Yes.
Unlike other wines?
Well, I'm only tasting this one today.
No, but in your
Yeah.
experience.
Some overwhelm you. They're so
big.
powerful,
Yeah.
so big.
Yeah.
This one isn't like that. This one is seductive.
It's a white wine of red wines.
I've never heard that expression.
I just made it up.
I know. It
Yeah.
sounds like you just
Yeah,
made
because
it up.
you drink a lot of Chardonnay. Well, come on. You drink a lot of
Sounds-
white wine.
sounds
So
like
this
you
is
just made
this is more like a white wine of red wines for you.
Okay.
Carry on.
No, you were carrying on.
What were we talking about? the CCP policy. Okay, so it came into place in 2024 in Canada by the Canadian Real Estate Association and caused an enormous uproar, if you recall. It was a very complicated process, and it really essentially said you have, if you take a listing, you publicly market that listing.
Correct.
Public marketing was defined as anything such as a for sale sign,
Social media.
social media, a newspaper ad,
Mass mailers.
mass mailers,
What's that?
website. Thanks, Christian. As soon as you did any one of those things to promote your listing, you then had the clock started. You had 3 days, not business days, essentially 72 hours to load that listing onto MLS, so that everybody would have an opportunity to see it, allegedly in everybody's best interest, both the seller from an exposure perspective and the buyer, the consumer, from an opportunity to see the listing.
And conversely, if you didn't want it to go to MLS, it could only stay within a particular brokerage that it initiated from. So agents with a brokerage, that exclusive listing, because now it's not going to go to MLS, can only be marketed within your brokerage.
Right.
They expanded that a little bit to say a one-on-one, you can go outside your brokerage, but you can't do it publicly on a broad basis.
Right, or in a mass mailing.
Yeah.
You can't send out a group email. For
Correct.
example.
Now, where the controversy is that I think that is a very good policy because I think the consumer is well served because all of the stuff that we talked about at the beginning, which was the 10-day, the coming soon, which went many, many days, beyond 10 days, sometimes weeks, is eliminated and has been since this policy has come into place. So properties go on the MLS, and I'm a firm believer that once a property gets on the MLS, because I know you're going to get into an elitist argument with me, once a property comes onto the MLS, thousands of people, in fact, as you know, from some of the data that we looked at, in fact, earlier this week, that on some days there are over 30,000 showings of the available listings on the marketplace. That means that consumer who has the listing, to use a cliche, many eyeballs are on that listing. The likelihood of him getting a good price is exponentially increased when the property is on the MLS. And yes, some people take offense at that. But I think for the overall consumer good, it is a good policy.
Yeah, but why forget about the mechanics of this. And by the way, we had discussions about this 3-day window. When it was first introduced, you may recall that I took the position that this 3 days is going to turn into a nightmare. And it did. Because how do you police this? If you recall, if you have 3 days in which to publicly market your listing before it must go on MLS, how is this monitored? How is it regulated? How is it policed?
They delegated it to the local associations.
They did. And we had many discussions with the Toronto and Region Real Estate Board about how this was going to shake out and what the penalties were going to be. And in the early days, it was unclear how they were going to manage it. They knew which rules they were going to apply, but everybody was policing everybody, tattletaling essentially, because we wanted fairness. If this is the new regulation, everybody should comply. But it was a testy time, and people were looking for workarounds because they, as you said, had many years of this coming soon where they could effectively market the property
Correct.
themselves. I said 3 days was going to be a problem. If you're going to do this, if you're going to implement a must-go-on MLS policy, if you're listed with a member of a real estate brokerage that is a member of a board, then
Which is 99% of
Correct.
the industry.
right, why give them 3 days? It's just you're teasing. It's
In
too
the U.S.,
difficult.
they don't.
So in the U.S., curiously, and we never talked about the National Association of Realtor policy when we were introducing this to our agents, particularly, because there was quite a bit of discussion about how this
And controversy.
and people were quite agitated. We never talked about the NAR almost identical rule, except theirs was introduced in 2020 with 1 day.
I think it was 2019.
Okay, 2019, 1 day to market publicly to market your exclusive listing publicly. Then you had to go
Which
on
is
MLS.
effectively no time to market.
No time, which I think is the better solution, personally, if you're going to be doing this. But the bigger question is, if you're correct, and let's make the assumption that you are, that a property has a better chance of achieving a higher price with greater exposure. It's pretty intuitive. What about the seller side? Why should I be forced? Because your association
Well, this is where we're going to come into conflict.
agreed. And by the way, I was, for all of our listeners, when Chris and I were initially kicking this around, because they gave us a little bit of lead time. CREA, the Canadian Real Estate Association, gave us a heads up that this was coming down the pipeline, I think 3 or 4 months. And we were, continuously trying to figure out how we're going to implement it corporately and how we're going to introduce it to our agents community. And it was at that point we were talking about, should it have been 3 days or 1 day or no day? I was completely on board with you that we should be exploiting the MLS system to its maximum potential.
Correct.
Because after all, it is a very, very sophisticated system.
Works beautifully.
And it has for many decades. In fact, I think it was the envy of the real estate world at one point.
I think it probably might still be.
It is a remarkably effective tool, and I'm a massive proponent of it. Not everybody is, and I think it's stratified by price point or price segment. Unfortunately, a provision like this or an edict like this does interfere with my private property rights. Although I was completely on board with you, I have, and I still am notionally, I have swung around to the private.
Government has gotten into.
But this isn't government.
No, but for all intents and purposes,
Is it?
it's our government. It's our association. It governs us.
Okay.
But look at everything else, like the vacant home tax. I mean, you can't.
You're talking about the erosion of private property
Yes,
rights?
absolutely. But
But-
in this case, it's in the consumer's best interest. Most things.
Why do I care about the consumer's best interest as a seller?
What do you mean?
Why is that my issue?
Because you want to get the best price you can for your property.
I want to sell my house the way I want to sell my house.
No, but you probably don't understand that it's in
Well,
your
there are
best
studies
interest.
that suggest that I
You
don't understand.
it's in your.
But what if I do?
If you do, then you keep it within the brokerage.
Okay. Let's take another.
I mean, if this is going to be a debate on property rights,
Well, I've veered towards this as I've been kind of administering. We've been administering this policy now, and it has struck me that there are and forget about price point for a moment. There might be some people who do not want, for example, their entire history of their listing, of their campaign, let's call it. I want to sell my house. I'm going to start a campaign. How am I going to do that? First, I'm going to hire a professional realtor. That realtor is going to hopefully tell me my options in terms of marketing. That's your duty. And I would make a decision on how I'm going to market my property. And to your point, I might decide I'm very private. I'm a celebrity, I'm a this or I'm a that, and I don't want my property on the market. But I also don't necessarily want to use the MLS system because I don't want people to know everything that's gone on my listing. Because once it's out there, it's out there.
True.
And all the history of my reductions and days on market.
Then you will keep it within the brokerage. And your agent will use the vehicles that are available, the one-on-one marketing, collegial marketing within the brokerage. All of those things are available to you. Because you have to remember what you're talking about is the unicorn situations. But in the past, leading to the pandemic, we used to do 90,000 sales a year. Last year we did about 67, quite a drop. But of those 67,000 transactions, there's only a handful of them that fall into
we can't even track those.
Yeah, into the category that you're talking about. So we got to think about the consumer at large.
Okay, so let's assume I am one of those private people who don't believe that I should be dictated upon as to how my listing should be marketed. And I choose this route, which is available to us as an agent to market internally, but one-on-one. Why does my agent have to be handcuffed into only a very, very, very narrow band of marketing? Why can't my agent put it on its website? And why should my agent be restricted from doing so?
Because of the higher common good.
Is that my issue as a seller?
It isn't, but sometimes you have to make sacrifices to the greater good. And the greater good is for the bulk of the consumers to be able to expose their properties broadly and to be successful in terms of the purchase price that they achieve.
Shouldn't that be their choice?
Most people will make that choice.
If well informed.
If well informed,
Okay.
yes.
But some might make the choice otherwise.
Again, the common good says, I'm sorry.
Why should the common good be imposed on my private property?
Because it has to.
Why?
Because that's the way our society functions.
In a government elected scenario, but the disconnect here, the breakdown in your argument, I'm just trying here. I'm reaching.
You are reaching.
I'm doing a great job.
Reaching.
I am. But if we elect a government...
We should take a poll, and I guarantee you more people will say that my arguments hold more water than yours.
Who are we polling?
Whoever's listening to this podcast.
Okay. What are you talking about? Agents, sellers, buyers? Guaranteed buyers are going to say yes.
Buyers are going to say, absolutely. I want to know
100%.
what's out there.
Exactly. Agents?
Agents that don't work the high end of the market will probably say, I think it's a good policy.
Sellers?
And good agents, ethical agents, agents that never would have abused the system in the first place.
You're talking about abuse of the coming soon.
Correct.
I'm not talking about that anymore. We forget about that coming soon piece, because I'm not sure that's where I'm going. That's not where I'm going with this discussion. I want to know why your association, I'm repeating myself, should say to me that I cannot have my agent market my property broadly without being on the MLS. That's the piece.
Because your agent is a member of the association. The association has rules. The association has rules that say if you're going to take a listing, it has to be 60 days.
If it's going on the MLS.
If it's going on MLS. That's a rule. We accept it. There's all kinds of rules.
We accept it as the agents community.
And the consumer has no choice but to accept it as well if he wants his property on the MLS. It's the same thing.
What about the fact that there could be an argument that this edict, for lack of a better word, by the two associations, the Canadian and the American associations, is arguably anti-competitive?
Well, as you know, the Competition Bureau is reviewing this policy, here in Canada. In the United States, the DOJ is looking at this policy, the clear cooperation policy. So we may get government to tell us that it's okay or not okay, and we'll have to find out. I don't think there's you're either on one side of this argument or on the other side of the argument. And I don't think there's a definitive answer, but I think what you and I have tried to do is try and explore that. And I think it's important for the consumer to understand that the broader the exposure, in my opinion, the more likely you're going to see more eyes on the property and ultimately get the best price that you can. Maybe there are circumstances when you have to go exclusive, but now you're restricted to stay exclusive within the brokerage.
That's my issue.
Yeah. The other part that I don't like, we don't have time to do this now, but maybe we can come back to it, is I think, and I know for a fact that in the United States this is happening, that some brokerages are manipulating this clear cooperation policy to acquire market share
When you
at
say
the expense of the consumer.
manipulating,
Yes.
elaborate.
No, I'm not going to. I'm going to save that for another.
It's a big piece, though.
Yeah, you know what? Something just
It's
dawned on
competition,
me.
though.
Something just dawned on me. I have a solution to Canada's housing problem.
That was 2 podcasts ago.
No, I actually have a
Since then,
solution
okay, great.
to it. What should happen is we should get the United States to run ads for carpenters, for plumbers, for construction.
We're not
workers.
even close
Just
to
listen.
finishing the thing about
just
the
listen,
clear cooperation
just
policy.
listen. It just dawned on me. So they run all these ads. So all of those workers will leave and go to the United States, and suddenly we won't have a housing problem here.
Quoi?
We won't have a housing problem.
Oh, I see.
Because they're going to leave, so they're going to make available the houses that they currently live in. And if these numbers are accurate, probably half the population of Canada will leave for the United States.
I've always admired you, but now I think you're an absolute genius. That is, as I've always said, you should.
What do you think?
You had until 5. You have till 5 o'clock today
What do you
to
think?
throw your hat in for the Liberal Party nomination for
What do you
leadership.
think?
Okay, sure.
Resolution to the housing problem.
Okay. Oh my goodness.
May I, before we close,
Yeah,
may I
please,
see
yeah.
how this?
I'm not done with you yet. And I have one more point. I don't. If we run over a little bit of time. I want to sell my house, and I want it to be done exclusively. I don't want to be on the ML. How do you think? Oh, okay, it's getting better. You have to admit, it's definitely getting deeper.
And it's actually finishing stronger too.
That's what I meant. Deeper.
Yeah.
Yeah. I told you it would. These things, they've been in the bottle for a while.
Oh my God!
I want to sell my house, and I want to do it exclusively because I don't
You're
want
gonna have
my.
to wrap this up. So make this your last point.
Fine. I don't want my photos of my house, my art, everything on the MLS. I just don't want that. I believe I'm entitled to that.
List exclusively.
Fine. But I also want my agent to have an open house,
Okay.
which I can do for 3 days.
Correct.
Yeah. But then I have to go MLS.
I actually think there's a technique for having an open house, even when you're exclusive. But
Do you?
I do.
Care to share that?
No.
Okay. Assuming I don't know that technique, I want to go and have an open house the next week as well. Can't do it.
I believe you can.
Well, and why won't you share this with us right now?
Because it's
It's
just
in a public park.
It's just a park secret.
All right. Okay. Well, we haven't resolved a single thing.
I don't think it's resolvable. You take a position or you don't. I take a position that
you've been unwavering in your position all the way
even
through.
prior to the implementation of this policy.
I do recall that you have
If
always
an
been an
agent
advocate.
came to see
Yeah,
me and
get
and
it on
said,
MLS.
Get it on MLS. Get it on MLS.
Yeah, I know you have been incredibly consistent about that. I've just been, just to kind of summarize, I've been very reflective of privacy rights.
As we close, I just want to say one thing. I am also troubled by the erosion of property rights.
I would hope you are.
I'm very troubled by it.
This is just another example.
Just another example. In that regard, I'm in agreement with you. But I'm overlooking that with a view to what's in the best interest of the consumer. And that's the last I have to say on it.
I guess it's a focus issue. You're focused on the consumer, and I'm
Yes.
focused on the selling client.
And property rights.
Well, one and the same.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a seller, I have property rights. Why am I being handcuffed by my agent's association? And I think that's, to a certain extent, why the Competition Bureau is at least
Looking at it.
taking
Yeah.
a look at this.
Looking at it. One thing we should mention before we close, a good thing happened this week in Hamilton.
That is a very good
What
thing.
happened in Hamilton?
So Hamilton has two issues. They were going, well, first of all, they have a vacant home tax,
They do.
which they've had for some time. So it's just really only Hamilton, Toronto, and I believe
I think
Ottawa.
they call it a vacant unit tax.
Vacant or underutilized.
VUT.
Okay, ours is vacant home, theirs is
Yeah.
vacant unit. Same thing. Ottawa, Toronto, and now Hamilton. But they were going to have an increased land transfer tax.
Municipal land transfer tax.
Like we have in Toronto, which you recall the brouhaha that started when, we used to have just a 2% minus $3,525 provincial
Ballpark around 2%.
minus
Over 440,000 in value.
minus
Yeah,
$3,525.
yes, of course, don't forget
Yeah,
that.
don't forget that. And then I don't
That
2000
wouldn't even buy you a.
no, it wouldn't. It wouldn't. Then the city of Toronto implemented their own 2% tax.
Okay, we don't need the history. Just tell.
So now Hamilton decided, hey, that's a good way to raise some revenue. And they wanted to do the same, but 3%, I think.
I think it was 3%.
Yeah. But from what I understand,
City council voted it down.
there was a lot of pushback by the local realtors.
Realtors. Oh yeah, absolutely.
So that is a fantastic piece of civic kind
Yes.
of influence. The people have spoken.
Yeah, and I think we should toast to that.
Yes, good for Hamilton. Good for
for
them.
Hamilton.
Land transfer tax is a nightmare for all of us.
Thank you, everyone.
See you next week.
See you next week. Well, maybe not next week, but next podcast.
This podcast is
Next podcast. And Doug's
Okay, so
going to
this
have
is
a
good.
very difficult time topping this baby.
Okay, there you go. So I have kind of rehabilitated myself
Yes,
with
you
some
have.
respect to last
Yes,
week.
you have to. After
Okay.
last podcast.
Yeah, thank
This
you
is
very much.
absolutely amazing.
Thank you. Glad you like it.
Thank you, Doug.
You're welcome.
And thank you, everyone.